Anyways, there's a big problem and in the popular argument that's become so popular about finance about everything is that the United States government basically is never going to pay its debts down, right? And that because of the fact that it will never pay its debt, because of the fact that, essentially, uh, how should I put this? It's unpopular politically to cut spending on anything. It's unpopular politically to hike taxes on anything. And so no politician is likely going to hike taxes because they'd be run out of Washington pretty quickly if they did that. And no politician is going to assault the third rail because they'd likely be run out of Washington if they did that. And so the whole underlying thesis is that the government's plan is to secretly destroy the dollar, debase the dollar, and let it decline in value in order to, basically make damn certain that it screws its creditors and gets a stealth way out of this crisis. But there's a there's a big hole, a gaping hole in that argument, right? That isn't being considered by these YouTubers that are saying this shit. And that hole is the impact of the banks and the private banks and the fact that the deposits that people put into them allow them to issue loans to people. This comes up over and over and over again in history. I'm reading just recently, I've been reading a book that you should read, which is A Brief History of Doom, 200 Years of Financial Crisis by Richard Vig and everything. But it shows in this book that, essentially the bankers, they always can be counted on because if you understand how a bank works, a bank gets to make loans off the backs of a deposit, but sooner or later, the banks always run out of people that, are good people to lend money to. And they always, and this comes up, it came up in the Great Depression. It's coming up now. It came up to the financial crisis in 2007. It's a consistent pattern. What you see in financial crises is almost always there's a run up in private sector lending to people. The banks, they lend a bunch of money to people, right? And they keep lending them money. Eventually, they run out of good people to lend that money to, but they keep wanting to grow. They're greedy, and in order to keep growth going, you've got to lend to subprime borrowers at some point because there just aren't enough people that are solvent and are, fiscally responsible and, well adjusted, I'll say, to borrow money, to lend money to. And so eventually credit lending standards loosen up historically, and it happens over and over and over again, and they start making a bunch of big, shitty, stinky, speculative loans. And they do this time after time. They did it in the 20s, they're doing it, they did it, in the early aughts, and they're doing it now. They're doing it all over again, like, it's not new behavior. And all it depends on is understanding that the banks make their money off lending money to people and everything and writing loans off your deposits. But eventually those banks have to go somewhere that they can get returns. And if they run out of people, that are good people to lend money to, eventually they start lending to the subprime borrowers. And this happens over and over and over again, and eventually there's a big, and as it happens, a big mountain of big, bad, stinky, shitty loans always accumulates over time. And then when it reaches a significant threshold, eventually you get a big meltdown financially. And right now we're in the building up phase, of mounting bad loans and bad debt And basically, why we're watching bad debt go from bad to worse. And I fully expect that on August 4th, when the New York Fed launches its quarter two report, we're going to see that the numbers went from bad to worse.